piano in the Silver Dollar Saloon didn't just stop. It died. One final. Discordant note hung in the air, thick with the smell of cheap whiskey and the metallic tang of an approaching mountain storm. Silas Vance didn't look up from his glass. He didn't have to. He knew the sound of a room losing its breath. He knew the sound of a ghost walking through a swinging door. Silas was 54, with a face that looked like it had been carved out of dry riverbed and eyes the color of a winter sky. Just before the first snowflake hit, he'd spent 12 years on a ranch 3 miles out of town, a place where the only voices he heard were the lowing of cattle and the wind whistling through the gaps in his pride. He was a man who had buried his past in a shallow grave. But out here in the West, the dirt is loose. Things have a way of digging themselves back up. She stood in the doorway, framed by the fading amber light of a dying Tuesday. Her dress was a pale, dusty blue, torn at the hem and stained with the red clay of the lower valley. She wasn't more than 22, but she carried herself like she'd lived a century in the last 3 days. Her hair, once pinned neat, was a wild tangle of golden burrs. She didn't ask for a drink. She didn't ask for help. She just scanned the room with a look of frantic, wide-eyed terror. The look of a doe that had heard the click of a hammer. Silas watched her through the reflection in the grime-streaked mirror behind the bar. He saw the way her hands shook. He saw the bruise, dark as a plum, flowering along her jawline. And he saw the way she looked at him, or rather, the way she looked at the empty chair beside him. For a moment, the only sound was a rhythmic thump-thump of the swinging doors settling back into place. Then she moved. She didn't walk. She stumbled, her boots catching on the sawdust floor. Silas finally turned his head. He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in a decade, he felt a flicker of something that wasn't bitterness. It was recognition. He'd seen that look in a mirror once, back in Tennessee, after the smoke had cleared, and he realized he was the only one left standing. In this country, Silas said quietly, sometimes things need killing. Let's get you out of the light. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask who was chasing her. He just stood up, threw a silver dollar on the scarred with the bar, and guided her out the back door toward the hitching post. The town of Blackwood was already tucking itself into the shadows, the lanterns flickering in windows like nervous eyes. He helped her onto his horse, a sturdy bay that didn't mind the extra weight, and they rode toward the ranch's silence, so heavy it felt like a third passenger. The next 3 days were a lesson in the architecture of silence. Silas's cabin was small, 1 room, a stone hearth, and a loft he hadn't used since his wife passed during the Great Fever. He gave the girl the bed and took a bedroll by the fire. He followed the old way. He didn't pester her with questions. Instead, he made coffee, black, strong enough to wake the dead. He fried salt pork and boiled potatoes. He watched her from the porch as he whittled a piece of cedar, his knife shaving away the wood just as the days were shaving away her fear. On the second morning, she told him her name was Elias. She told him about a man named Elias Thorne, a man who owned half the valley and thought he owned the people in it, too. She spoke of a contract that felt more like a cage, and a night where the cage door had been left unlatched. He'll come, Elias said, sitting on the porch steps, her feet bare against a rough-hewn timber. He doesn't like losing things, especially things he's paid for. Silas didn't flinch. He just kept carving. The law doesn't reach past my fence line, Elias, and Thorne knows that. Out here, a man's land is his own kingdom, and I haven't abdicated yet. They spent that afternoon mending a section of the paddock. If you're still here, sitting by the fire with us, maybe you felt that same shadow on your own porch, the feeling that the past is catching up, no matter how fast you ride. If this story is hitting home, go ahead and give that like button a tap. It helps more folks find their way to the cabin. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from tonight? What's the time on your clock? Stick around, because the real storm's about to break. And out here in the West, the truth usually comes out in the dark. The 4th morning arrived with a layer of frost that looked like shattered glass. Silas didn't wait for them to come to the ranch. He knew how men like Thorne worked. They'd wait until nightfall. Then they'd burn the barn with the animals inside. They'd turn a sanctuary into a funeral pyre. Pack your things, Silas said, his voice flat and hard. Are we running? Ilera asked, her face pale. No, Silas replied, sliding his gun into the scabbard on his saddle. We're going back to the Silver Dollar. If this ends, it ends where it started, in front of witnesses. They rode into Blackwood at noon. The town felt different. The shops were open, but the people stayed behind the glass. They knew. News travels faster than a bullet in a small town, and everyone knew Silas Vance had taken Thorne's property. Silas led Ilera into the saloon. It was busier now. The midday crowd was huddled over their beers, the air thick with tobacco smoke and the low hum of gossip. As Silas and Ilera walked toward the center table, the hum died. One by one, men looked away. They stared at their boots. They stared at the foam in their glasses. Silas pulled out a chair for Ilera. He sat across from her, his back to the door, his Winchester leaning casually against the table. He ordered 2 plates of stew and 2 coffees. Ilera was trembling. The saloon was a tomb. She looked at the men around her, men she'd known her whole life, and saw only cowards. Then she looked at Silas. His face had changed. The old man was gone. The quiet rancher who whittled cedar was replaced by something cold and ancient. His eyes weren't on her. They were fixed on the doorway, but they were vacant, as if he were looking to the walls and into another world. The silence stretched. It was a physical weight, pressing down on the room. Ilera reached across the table, her fingers brushing Silas's hand. Silas, she whispered. Her voice seemed to echo in the stillness. Why are you looking at me like that? You're scaring me. She shivered, a deep, convulsive shudder that shook her entire frame. She thought, for one terrible second, that she had traded one monster for another. Silas didn't blink. His expression remained a mask of frozen iron. I'm not looking at you, Ilera, Silas said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried to every corner of the room, cutting through the tension like a razor. Slowly, Silas raised his right hand. He didn't reach for his gun. He just extended a long, callous finger and pointed. He pointed directly over Ilera's shoulder, toward the dark, swinging doors of the saloon. I'm looking at what's behind you. Ilera froze. She didn't turn around. She couldn't, but she heard it, the slow, rhythmic creak of the floorboards, the jingle of spurs that sounded like a funeral bell. The saloon went dead quiet. Not even the barkeep dared to breathe. 3 men stood in the doorway. In the center was Elias Thorne. He was dressed in a suit that cost more than Silas's ranch. His mustache waxed to a sharp point, a heavy gold watch chain draped across his belly. But it was the 2 men flanking him that had caused the room to turn to stone. They were the hollow men, regulators from the South, men who had no names, only reputations. They wore black duster coats stained with the dust of a dozen territories, and their hands hung low and loose by their sides. Thorne stepped forward, his boots clicking on the wood. He didn't look at Silas. He looked at Ilera's back. Ilera rose, Thorne said, his voice smooth as grease. You've caused a lot of trouble for a girl who doesn't even own the shoes on her feet. Stand up. We're going home. That's the problem with the New West, Silas said. Finally standing up, he rose slowly, his joints popping, his shadow stretching long across the floorboards. Everybody's so busy talking. They forget to listen to the silence. It'll tell you everything you need to know. One of the hollow men, the one with a scar running through his eyebrow, took a step forward. His hand hovered over the bone grip of his coat. Step aside, old-timer. This ain't your fight. Silas smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was a smile of a man who had just found a missing piece of a puzzle. The fight started 12 years ago, Silas said. I just took a long break. In a blur of motion that no one in that saloon would ever be able to fully describe. Silas didn't grab the Winchester. He grabbed the heavy oak table. With a grunt of pure animal strength, he flipped it. The stew bowl shattered. The coffee splashed. The table slammed into the floor, creating a wall of wood between Ilera and the doorway. The first shot came from the scarred man. The bullet buried itself in the oak table. Silas was already moving. He didn't go for his belt. He reached under the bar, a spot where he'd tucked a second, shorter shotgun earlier that morning. He'd known the barkeep, wouldn't stop him. Boom! The roar of the sawed-off 12-gauge filled the saloon, shattering the remaining glasses on the back bar. The scarred man was lifted off his feet and thrown through the swinging doors out into the dusty street. The second hollow man drew, his aim true, but Silas had the momentum of a man who had nothing left to lose. Silas dived behind the bar as a hail of lead tore through the wood and grain sacks. "Ilara!" under the bar. Silas roared. She scrambled. Lever. Fire. Lever. Fire. 2 shots. The second hollow man dropped his gun, clutching a shoulder that would never hold a rifle again. He slumped against the doorframe, his face turning the color of ash. Then there was only Thorne. The king of the valley stood alone in the center of the room. His gunmen were down. His power was gone. He reached for a small, nickel-plated derringer he kept in his vest. A coward's gun. Silas didn't fire. He stepped out from behind the bar, the Winchester leveled at Thorne's heart. "Don't do it, Elias," Silas said. His voice was steady, almost bored. "That little toy won't even reach me before I turn that suit of yours into a sieve." Thorne's hand trembled. He looked at the bodies of his unbeatable men. He looked at the eyes of the townsfolk who were slowly peeking out from under the tables. Eyes that no longer held fear, only contempt. Thorne dropped the derringer. It hit the sawdust with a pathetic little thud. "This isn't over," Thorne hissed, though his knees were shaking. "I have lawyers. I have the governor." "You have a long walk home," Silas said. He walked forward, the barrel of the Winchester cold against Thorne's forehead. "And if I ever see you or anyone with your name on this side of the ridge again, I won't use the gun. I'll let the ghosts handle it. And believe me, Elias, they've been waiting a long time for a man like you." Silas turned his head slightly. "Barkeep, get the sheriff. Tell him we got some trash that needs hauling." The room stayed quiet for a long time after Thorne was led away in irons. It was a different kind of quiet now. It wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of a fever breaking. Silas reached down and helped Ilara up from the floor. He brushed the sawdust from her shoulder. He looked at her, and the coldness in his eyes finally melted, leaving only the tired rancher behind. "You okay, miss?" Ilara looked at him, then at the room, then back at Silas. She did something she hadn't done since she arrived. She smiled. They didn't stay in town for the celebration. Silas didn't want the thanks of men who had watched in silence while a girl was hunted. He and Ilara rode back to the ranch as the first real snowflakes of the season began to fall, dusting the red clay with a coat of white. That night, the fire in the hearth was bigger than usual. The cabin smelled of cedar and stew. Silas sat in his chair, whittling a new piece of wood. Ilara sat on the bedroll, watching the flames. "Silas?" she asked after a while. "Yeah." "Back there, in the saloon, when you pointed behind me. How did you know they were there? You didn't even turn around." Silas stopped whittling. He looked at the small wooden bird he was carving. "I didn't have to hear them, Ilara," he said softly. "When a man's been alone as long as I have, he learns that the silence has a rhythm, and when someone evil enters a room, the rhythm skips a beat. I just waited for the skip." He went back to his carving. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters, but inside, the cabin was warm. In the West, they say that some stories end in gunfire, but maybe the best ones are the stories that begin after the smoke clears. The stories of two people, a cabin, and the slow, quiet work of building a home where the ghosts aren't allowed to stay. Silas Vance didn't expect much from life anymore, but as he looked at the girl who was finally, truly safe, he realized that sometimes the most important thing a man can do isn't to run for his past. It's to stand still and open the door for someone else who's still running. And out here, under the wide, unforgiving sky, that's more than enough. Take a deep breath. Pour yourself one last cup. And remember, the West doesn't forget, but it does forgive if you're brave enough to ask. We'll see you on the next trail.